Sent Ali Megrahi on compassionate grounds. He's suffering from terminal prostate cancer and will return to Libya to die. 270 people died when Pan Am Flight 103 blew up nearly 21 years ago.
It was December 1988. Pan Am Flight 103, on its way from London to New York, explodes over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, blown up by a bomb hidden in a suitcase. 270 people were killed, 11 of those residents of Lockerbie on the ground. The bulk of the passengers on board Pan Am Flight 103, Americans on their way home for Christmas. Lockerbie, from that moment on, would forever be associated with one of the worst terrorist atrocities on British soil. It wasn't for another 13 years that the man accused of the bombing was found guilty. Abdel Basit Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi, one-time security chief for Libyan Arab Airlines, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years before he would become eligible for parole. Even then, some relatives of the victims say they weren't sure the right man was ever caught.
I found the trial process confusing and quite difficult to understand because much of the evidence was...
Yeah, so we just saw in the video that maybe 20 years after the killing of 270 people, this man, Mr. Megrahi, who was a Libyan national, was implicated on 31st January 2001, and then he was put in the Scotland prison. But because he was having prostate cancer, so as an amnesty, he was sent back to his country in Libya, because he had nearly 3 months more to live. And this was like totally condemned by the US government and saying that no, this is a mistake that you're doing. And the funny thing is that when Mr. Megrahi goes back to Libya, his flight lands at Libya, he is given a hero's welcome and everybody is like cheering for him and everybody is like throwing flowers on him. So this was seen as an insult to the 270 people dead on the Clipper of the Maid of the Sea's flight. Now, the resolution of 1992 under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter adopted was sanctioned heavy and severe sanctions against Libya. So I have listed many sanctions. So it's not important to know all, but if you just look at a few, for example, significantly reduce diplomatic and consular personnel in Libya, and also prohibit the provision of weapons and ammunition and other military equipment to Libya. And also, because everybody knows about Abdul Gaddafi, who was a dictator of Libya for 40 years, and under him many things happened. But also, the Libyan aircraft was the national airlines of Libya was not allowed to enter any of the United Nations countries, and also Libya paid a lot of compensation money to all the 270 people died. They paid a lot of compensation money, and even if they paid so much compensation money, still it took quite a bit of time for UN to remove the restrictions of sanctions against them. Okay, so after having understood the case of Libya, now let us see the case of Afghanistan, because no discussion on terrorism can be complete without talking about Afghanistan and the Taliban regime. Let me be very clear. So let's talk about Afghanistan. What happens is that in 1998, the US bombings, the US embassy bombings in East Africa, in 2 cities, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and Nairobi in Kenya. In these 2 cities, on the same day, same time, 2 massive blasts of the US embassies kills many local people and nearly 19 US nationals. So, in this major attack, it was in this major attack in the US embassies that 2 people, Osama bin Laden and Abdul Masood Zarqawi, who were the 2 guys who were first implicated for their for this bombing in a combination of effort with the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. So this is the first time that the United Nations comes across a name which is Osama bin Laden, the first time, and then US places it on the FBI's 10 top most wanted people. US places Osama bin Laden as one of them. But this is the first time that Osama bin Laden comes into the world picture because of this bombing. And Zarqawi, of course, we will see that he does more heinous acts. So basically this is against the US embassy, right? So we are talking about how US and how the other countries are fighting. So United Nations is not yet affected. Let's see. The Security Council resolution of 1267 in 1998 established sanctions regimes to cover individuals and entities associated with Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and Taliban wherever located. So the United Nations Security Council identified that the countries like Afghanistan was giving safe haven to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and because of this, they put sanctions against Afghanistan. So on your right hand side, you can see the picture which is of the US Embassy, East Africa, Bombay. And below here, you see two Pakistani Taliban people who, and in the middle you see a Polish geologist. So he went to Pakistan and the border of Afghanistan for geology, a Polish guy, but he was beheaded by the Taliban. So now, the resolutions imposed on a series of demands on member states as well as Afghanistan under Chapter 7. And the first included the Taliban must not allow territory under its control to be used for terrorist training. The Taliban must turn over Osama bin Laden to the appropriate authorities, and all countries must deny flight permission to all Taliban-operated aircraft. So they have many sanctions against Afghanistan for harboring Osama bin Laden. So we have seen that because of the inability of US to catch Osama bin Laden before he does anything wrong, 2001 9/11 attacks is also perpetrated by Osama bin Laden. So everybody knows about that. So I'm not going to talk about 9/11 because it's the most heavily discussed topic and everybody knows everything about it. But basically, let's because I felt that okay, maybe everybody doesn't know about Taliban, what Taliban exactly is. So maybe throw more light on Taliban rather than on Osama bin Laden. So Taliban is like the clergy Islamic rule of Afghanistan, which is doing many heinous acts and harboring terrorists, training terrorists, doing many things. So in this regard, United Nations Council resolution of 1267 has imposed many sanctions against Taliban. Why is it like that? Is it justified? Is it justified that you put sanctions against a country, Afghanistan, which cannot be proved as being harboring Osama bin Laden? Is it justified? Okay, what do you think? I'm going to show you a small video. It's going to be disturbing, but when you're talking about terrorism, I cannot help. So viewers' discretion is requested, and yeah. So let's look at this short video.
Let's get you a shocking video from Afghanistan. Taliban militants say they've executed 2 women who worked as prostitutes on a US base. As you see in this video, the brutality women got into a car on which Taliban militants opened fire. Well, these pictures of the execution taken by an Associated Press television news crew who was in the vicinity when the women were killed. The crew heard gunshots and filmed from some distance in the dark. The incident happened in the Ghazni province in central Afghanistan. Now, while the spokesperson for Ghazni's governor says that the women were innocent, Taliban fighters say they were running a prostitution ring.
They were taking pure and innocent Muslim women of this province to the Americans, other foreigners at the provincial reconstruction team, and to local Afghans to earn money through prostitution.
Okay. So now, just now we saw a shocking video of how Taliban executed 2 women in broad daylight, and because of no reason at all. They could not prove it that they were really prostitutes, or they were what, or they could not prove anything. But just because of the regime of the Taliban, they shot the 2 women. So we have seen it in front of our eyes. So the question is it justified that these sanctions be signed against a country? Well, there was a proof. Okay. So after having